Hello, my name is Glenn Keller, and welcome to Our Greatest Strength. I'm here with my partner, Dimple Shaw.
Hi,
And
everyone.
hi, and today we are going to be interviewing Gail Farnsley, a good friend and colleague of mine and Dimple's in the Indianapolis community. Could you expand a little bit, Gail, a little bit about yourself and how we know each other?
Sure. Hey, Glenn, Dimple. Yeah, Gail Farnsley. Glenn and I were reminiscing how long it's been, but we met when I first started working at Gartner as an executive partner. And that was back in the pre-Country Mark days. And I think, in that type of role, you have clients that you meet and you get to know them as a client, but then when they change jobs, that's it. You don't hear from them again. And that wasn't the case. Glenn and I had a lot in common and felt like we kind of became friends through that. So I'd say we were coworkers or customer relationship for a while, and then became friends and have stayed connected ever since. And that I think I was lucky that I got to do a lot of that through that executive partner job at Gartner, right? Working with CIOs and helping them with their teams and their companies and strategies, things like that. Good stuff.
Well, welcome once again, Gail.
Thank
We're
you.
excited to have you. So let's start off by sharing a little bit about your journey to the US. How
Yeah,
did you end up being here? Can you share a little bit about that?
I will. And I think that the biggest thing is people who don't know me real well will be surprised that I had a journey to the US because I seem like, um, you look at me and and listen to me, right? I just sound like any Midwesterner. But when just before my fifth birthday, my parents moved my younger brother and I to Northern Ohio. So we were living in Scotland. My whole family is from Scotland, just south of Glasgow. And it was at a time where, I mean, it's actually in the Museum of Scotland called the Scottish diaspora. The economy was quite bad. And in my case, my aunt, my dad's sister, had come to Northern Ohio for a 1-year position as a nanny. And she met someone and they got married. And so we had friends who'd come and told about the land, typical, right? Or, this was in the early 60s, the land of opportunity in America. And there were lots of jobs and lots of opportunity. And so many people were leaving at that time to come to other places. And so my parents applied both to Canada and to the US because they could come. I mean, it's one of those things you hear about on the news, right? Chain migration. But my aunt was here. Her husband was able to sponsor. And my mom's two brothers and my mom all applied to both Canada and to the US. And it just so happened that our US came first. That came through first. My mom's brothers both moved to Canada, and we came to Northern Ohio. And I remember my dad, he came 3 months before us to fix up a place for us to live. My poor mother, I always think of this, my poor mother getting on a BOAC flight with a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. And I will say the 2.5-year-old was not quiet during that flight. And my poor mother was wrestling him for much of that overseas flight. I just can't, I sometimes think about it. I mean, they walked away from all of their family, right? Left everyone and took a huge risk, right? Took a huge risk because they wanted to have a better life for their kids. And I always think about that, right? I think about at the fact that, my mom and dad, they were 25 years old and they packed up everything they had into some suitcases and their two kids and moved to America. And at that point, there weren't inexpensive phone calls. I mean, we went back twice for visits when I was living at home before I went to college because it was just too expensive. We couldn't afford something like that, flights back to Scotland. And I remember getting those blue airline airmail letters that my grandparents would send. And then they would always send us every few months, they would send us newspapers wrapped up because you could send newspapers really cheap. And they'd put British sweeties in the middle of them for us. And it was such a treat to get them because we get some. And I swear some of those sweets of fruit pastels are still one of my favorites because of that. No chocolate though, because it would always melt.
Lesson learned. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we actually entered the US from Canada. We came into Toronto and drove. My dad drove up and picked us up, and we drove across the border into the US from Canada, lived in Northern Ohio. So yeah, that's how we got here. But it was definitely about economic opportunity. That's what we were doing.
Wow. So can you tell us, this is about the visa and green card process, and the whole immigration process. Like, what was the most frustrating part of that process? And do you how settled do you feel here now?
Yeah. Obviously, as terms of being settled, I mean, I lived here since I was 5, right? So I feel I did all my schooling in America. And so I feel very, settled in the US. And for me, the visa process is an interesting one because when we first came and then we got green cards relatively quickly, right?
Mhm.
Compared to now, right? When yeah, my daughter is married to someone from Lithuania, and they moved to the U.S. a couple of years ago. They were living in Europe, in Lithuania. He's got a master's degree. She's an American citizen, and it still took 2.5 to 3 years to get a visa for him to come to, as a spouse, to come to the U.S. Back then, it didn't take that long, right?
Mhm.
So we were able to come relatively quickly. And I will say the interesting part for me is I think about it for whatever, I mean, I think it was just timing. I didn't become a US citizen until I came back from an expat assignment in England in 2002. So when I came back, I was working for Cummins, and I came back from running Europe, Middle East, Africa into the CIO role at
Mm.
Cummins. When I moved to England, we realized there were some legal reasons it might make sense for me to go ahead and get my citizenship. It just had never, I was always busy. I had kids, I was working, you know, it just never got around to it. So I did all my paperwork. Craziest thing, I was moving back to the US. So it was in 2002. And I got at Christmas, I was in the US for Christmas with family and got a phone call, or they found me at my mother-in-law's house. It was really weird. It's like amazing how they could find you. But they found me and said, okay, you've got your citizenship interview is next week. And I was leaving the next day to go back to England. So I ended up going back and then coming back for the interview.
Oh,
And
wow.
then they said, well, you'll have your swearing in ceremonial. They'll send you a letter. It'll be in the next few months. It's like, okay, didn't think any more about it. That was like right in January. We were moving back in June. I get the letter, and the day of my swearing in was the day I was flying home from England with my daughter to
Oh,
move back to the US. And for a lot of different reasons, I couldn't do it. And I contacted, and they said, oh, it's no problem. Just tell them, and then we'll schedule it for the next session the next month. Perfect. I'll be back in Indianapolis. That'll be easy. It took a year until they rescheduled it. And during that time, my fingerprints expired, which is kind of something I didn't know happened. So I had to actually go back up to the office, get new fingerprints. And then a year later, so I mean, even though I lived in the US since I was 5, I started the process in January of 2001, and it was summer of 2003 before I had my swearing in ceremony to become a citizen.
okay. So that like one, hey, can we delay it a little bit because I'm going to be on a
Yes.
flight that day? Cost 2 years,
Yeah. It cost a year and a half.
year and a half.
Yep.
Wow.
Year and a half. Yep. Which is, and they told me, oh no, they'll just put you in the next one next month. So I mean, that's nothing compared to what other people have to deal with, right? But it was kind of an eye opener for me. I was like, this shouldn't be this hard, right?
That was next month in government terms.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
Well, I know what you mean. So perfect segue into the next question. So for you, as an immigrant, at least
Yeah.
5 years old and going through everything that you've been through, what do you think is the most difficult part of living in the US, and what do you think is the best part?
Best part.
Living with your kids?
I mean, I say that, we lived in the UK. I did an expat assignment for 2.5 years in England. So that was an interesting time to really compare as an adult. As a child, I think the hardest thing as a child was I just really missed my grandparents, who I never got to see and never got to talk to. That was, and I think about that for my parents, especially my mom, right? My dad went to work every day. My mom was home with 2 kids, and, she didn't have that family support that she used to have. So I do remember that as a child. It'd be grandparents' day, and I didn't have any grandparents who could come to grandparents' day at school, right? And I noticed that. And they also told me when I first came that I couldn't start school, even though I'd been in school when we left. We came in the fall. It was right before my birthday, and they said I had to wait to start school the next year because nobody could understand me. And I guess when we were at the airport leaving at Prestwick, my mom's aunt, so my great aunt was there, and I told her not to, don't worry, Auntie Kate, I'll never speak American.
Yeah.
That was and everybody in the family always remembers that I never speak American. But I did. And it
Obviously,
didn't
you
take
do.
that long. It didn't take that long, but as I said, it's still in there, right? It's still in there. And I'd say the best part here, I mean, I think for us, I mean, I look at my family that stayed, and of my cousins, I have not quite half of my cousins are still, about a third of my cousins stayed in Scotland. Their family stayed there, and about 2/3, either a third in the US and a third in Canada. Of the ones in the US and Canada, almost every one of us has gone on to college, and multiples of us have master's degrees. And of the ones in who stayed in Scotland, one went on to college, and of course he outdid us all. He has a PhD, runs a company, and actually was made an MBE, which is kind of an unheard of thing for a Scottish working class family like mine, right? So, but I look at it and think the opportunities, I think as a girl and as somebody who was pretty quiet and shy, I got opportunities here that I could never have expected to have. I don't know that I would have gone to university. I didn't know anybody who'd gone to college. I had a couple of cousins who were older, but they were in other countries, so I didn't see them, right? So in the US, I was the first one of college age, and I didn't know that many people that had gone to college, right? So I was lucky that I had a high school math teacher who said, "You can do this." And I said, "I can't pay for this. My dad's a carpenter, my mom's a waitress, and we don't have any money." He's like, "You'll figure it out. There's grants, there's scholarships. You need to go to college."
Mhm.
And I don't know that I would have had that, right? I think there's a bit more of people get slotted into paths. And I think here I had people who saw me and saw something in me I didn't see in myself. And I feel like I've had so many opportunities that I might not have been able to have had we stayed.
Okay, good. Well, okay, so you mentioned your grandparents.
Yes.
I mean, what else do you miss about home?
It's little things, right? Um, I mean, I miss the sweets. I can get some of them here. Um, and I think Scotland, because it's such a small place, right? It's such a small country. So you just feel this strong connection, right? I mean, when I hear bagpipes or I hear something about it, makes me very proud because I mean, it's a country. I think there are about the same number of people living in Scotland that live in Indiana. And it's a very tiny place. And so, I look at my cousins, and while I would not trade, I really wouldn't trade the life that I've had here for their lives in many ways. But there's something pretty nice about the fact that I've got cousins who live in the village that my grandparents grew up in or in the next village over. And, you know, it's a different choice about what your life's going to be, right? You make a choice that I'm going to live here because this is where I'm from, and
Mhm.
I'll work at whatever job I can get. So I'm not going to have a big fancy career, right? And I'm not going to climb the corporate ladder. I'm going to do a job that's available in this small community area, and that's okay because my life is about my family and this beautiful scenery. I mean, I think about the village where we're from. I mean, we used to visit my cousin and look out their window across to Erin and think, my God, you get to look at this every single day. Like you open your window, and as long as it's not cloudy, which of course in Scotland, it's cloudy 90% of the days, you can see this beautiful island across the sea, and it's just a beautiful place. So I think it's more of a romantic image than a reality, right? But it's there. It's
Well,
there.
I know, sorry, I gotta ask a follow
Yeah,
on
of
here. I
course.
mean, you didn't mention the haggis though.
Oh no, I didn't. I mean, I've eaten it, but I don't miss that much. And you can't get it in the real haggis you can't get in the US. It's illegal to import it into the US.
It's illegal.
Yes, because of the particular sheep innards that it's made of. You can't bring that into the US.
Wow, but almost always when we ask this question, our
Yeah.
top three food always ends up in the top
Yeah.
three.
Oh yeah,
We
sure.
miss.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So now, if someone were to ask you why they should travel to the US, what would you tell them, Gail?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell folks, come, it's just, I think part of it is scale, right? I think of a few of my relatives who've come, they just can't get over how big it is. I mean, it's just, so in terms of traveling, so from a visiting perspective, I just tell people come and just drive a little bit, because you just don't get, I mean, you could drive from one end of Scotland to the other in a day. It's not a very, I mean, it's about the size of Indiana, right? And once you get much north of Glasgow, there's nobody else on the roads. It's pretty empty. So kind of being able to come and drive for long distances and see that just the scale and the vastness of it from a vacation-y perspective. And I mean, for me, again, it goes back to those opportunities, right? If somebody's looking for it, I mean, I think it is a place, and it depends on where you end up, right? But I mean, I found we were in Northern Ohio. We had a huge Scottish community. I mean, my family we grew up with lots of Scottish friends, and they're real active. I don't think they're nearly as active today as they were back then, because so many people were coming. But there was a Britons in America club, and my parents would go, and I took Scottish dancing lessons when I was a little girl, I mean, because there was a huge community there. So I think depending on where you end up, you can have a bit of the kind of ethnic community of home, even wherever you are. And then you get the advantages of all of the advantages that are available to people in the US. I mean, I'm not somebody who came from any background of privilege, right? I mean, but I recognize I have a lot of privilege just because, I'm a white Northern European, right, who speaks English very well, right? So I mean, I don't look different, but I also recognize that I didn't have private school education or, lots of those things. And was able to build a really great life and a really wonderful career despite not having any of that, right? So I do kind of that idea that you can come here and do anything. I think it's true, right?
Yeah, yeah, wow. Wow, you hit home for me for a lot of things that you share.
Yeah.
So, okay, so
Yeah.
in your experience, right, do you
Yep.
feel like people from different regions or immigrants from different regions are treated differently, either in, relation to each other or in relation to you? Do you
Yeah.
think other immigrants are treated differently than you are?
Yeah. I definitely think so, right? Because as I said, I don't, nobody looks at me and anybody who looks at me and talks to me doesn't think, oh, this person's an immigrant, and then they have whatever stereotypes and unconscious biases or conscious biases they have related to that, right?
Right.
I know that's an advantage, right? That's a privilege that I have. But I've worked in my career, right? I've worked with people from all over the world. A lot of people who've come here, when I was with Cummins, right? I mean, we had a lot of people from our international offices would come and work here, come for temporary assignments, come and stay. And many of them had phenomenal experiences, but I also knew people who struggled, right? They struggled with because people do treat them differently, right? They look at them differently, they make assumptions. And I mean, I remember working with somebody a few years back who they were from India, and our team in Cummins, and their son was not interested in science and math kind of stuff at all, right? He wanted to do art, and it was a struggle for him because of the stereotype people assumed, right? Just assumed that he was going to be some engineer person, and
Right.
he wasn't. And he had to help people get over that, right? I mean, so there was a bias from just a who we think you should be. And then, of course, with all the stuff that's going on in the world right now, right? I mean, there just seems like we're just seeing more and more rhetoric about, immigrants and what immigrants are doing to our country. I mean, and I look at that, when I hear that, I think to myself, sometimes I want to say to people, that's me, right? I'm not first generation, I'm the one who came. So,
Right.
I mean, nobody looks at me and thinks I'm taking their job. I mean, maybe they are, right? But, that I don't ever have to feel that way, but I know people who do, right? So I recognize that I don't face that same thing, but I certainly see it. I see it with others.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your candid responses here. I'm really blown away. So thank you. What haven't we asked you already? It feels like we could talk to you forever.
Well, I know, and I was trying to think, and I was thinking, what else should we talk about? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess for me, I don't know if it's something you should have asked, but I guess I do think. I mean, I feel like I've been very fortunate, right? I've been so fortunate, and so I look at part of one of my things I do, right, in my retired life now that I am retired, which I don't think I said that at the beginning and I was supposed to. So I'm retired now. Part of what I like to do is I really like to work with young people and to give back. And so so maybe I'll use this as a chance. So sorry, you can edit this out if you don't want to use it. But one of my favorite things now is I love to be able to find opportunities where I can give back, particularly around getting people interested in careers in STEM and in technology, right? It's just been, I mean, if I look up to the sky to David Brewer, who was my high school math teacher, and said, you can do this. And I mean, let's be clear, I was not a straight A student. I was not an honor roll student. I was kind of a solid B, maybe some A's in there, but I was not a superstar student, right? But he saw something and said, technology is this new burgeoning career. You should really look into this. And it's been amazing for me, right? I mean, I think about just professionally, financial independence, and a rich, interesting career. So I love being able to talk to students about that and talk to them and focusing on kids who wouldn't get that encouragement otherwise, right? So, whether that's underrepresented kids, women in tech, but also first generation college students. I love to be able to tell people, look, when I went to college, I didn't know anybody who did this. I mean, I think about how hard it seems like with my own kids of the process they had to go through. And today it feels like, my God, I don't know what I would have done. Because I mean, the young people and I read applications for scholarships and for colleges, I think they're doing so much and the requirements are so high. And I think, I'm just fortunate that I got to do that. And my goal is to see how can I give back and try to get more of those kids, who might not see that as a path, right? I want somebody to say to a kid who says, my parents don't have any money, I can't do this, and immediately say, no, wait, we had no money and I did it, right? Now I know college costs a lot more now than it did when I went, but you can do this, you can make this happen. And hopefully try to help give back and if I can inspire a few kids to do that. So
No, I think it's a perfectly valid share, and we created this platform. I'm sure Glenn will agree. We created this platform to spread awareness and see how we can together try to make difference, one person at a time, one unconscious bias at a time, or
exactly.
one hint of awareness at a time. Thank you for sharing your passion, and thank you for sharing that.
Thanks.
And thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for thinking of me.
Oh, of course.
Oh, it was
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Gail.
Great. Thanks a lot. I enjoyed it. And which Glenn knows that's a lot because I stress about this kind of thing. So you guys made it very easy.
Great.
Thank you very much.